change in the fundraising sector has never been greater. But innovations in technology are evolving faster than our ability to understand them. Are these advances good or bad? Do they have unintended consequences? And what is the application to the global fundraising sector? That's what we're here to find out. Welcome to the Fundraising AI Podcast, your up-to-date resource for responsible AI for the global fundraising community, hosted by Nathan Chappell and Scott Rosenkrantz.
Well, hi, everyone. We're here for another episode of the Fundraising AI Podcast, joined by a couple really special guests today. I know Scott and I have been really looking forward to this episode 39, which is going to come out right after the second annual Global Summit for Fundraising AI, which is happening on October 1st. This is an episode that has been in the works for quite a while, actually probably 2 years in the making, because that's when we kind of roped Devi Thomas into the fundraising AI ecosystem, and we haven't let her go. And so it just continued to blossom in our relationship with her and Microsoft, and then a newfound individual, which we're going to introduce here in a minute, Erin McHugh Saif, which is also one of Devi's colleagues at Microsoft. So I'm Nathan Chappell. I am with Scott Rosenkrantz. We are the hosts of the Fundraising AI Podcast. Our guests today are really special. Devi Thomas works on community engagement as part of Microsoft Philanthropies AI skills team. And again, I've had the honor of knowing Devi for a couple years now, I guess. Time has flown, and she's been an instrumental partner, supporter, advocate, inspirer of all things fundraising AI. We would not be here without her, and really truly being a catalyst that has brought many of our other sponsors to come to fundraising AI. I don't know if you know that, Devi, but we would not be here if it weren't for you. Next dinner is on me. And then Erin McHugh Saif, I'm so excited to have as our newest member of the Fundraising AI Advisory Council, serves as Microsoft Tech for Social Impact Chief Product Officer. Erin and I met each other through Devi. We had this, I don't know, for me, it was a special Zoom call. Like, they were like two geeks in a pod. Like, it was so, we know a lot of the same people, but we're like, oh my gosh, and then this and this and this. And it was just like, I could have stayed on the call for a few hours. So thank you, Erin, for joining the Fundraising AI Advisory Council. Thank you, Devi, for introducing us and for really being the wind within our wings. Why don't we start?
Well, Nathan, if I could just say one thing really quickly, and that is that none of us would actually be here without Erin, because Erin is the one who brought me into Microsoft. We worked together at another tech company.
Oh my goodness.
And she was actually the person who joined this wonderful team, Tech for Social Impact at Microsoft, and then brought me along a few years later. So I think in some ways, every thank you to me is a thank you to Erin. So
well, it has been an amazing journey, and I think is a good metaphor for this amazing industry that we are all so privileged to work in, which is all about the people and all about the relationships at the end of the day.
Awesome. I love that you're here. Let's share with the audience a little bit about what you do. Microsoft loves big titles, apparently. Like, I don't know if your like business cards like fold out or something, because you're just like, these titles are like literally a paragraph. So let's start with you, Devi. I mean, I won't read your full title because it would take like a half an hour, but talk about what you do at Microsoft in your role. I know you bring people together, but more than that.
Yeah, I think Microsoft as a company, and Microsoft Philanthropies specifically, recognizes that the technology that we put out there in the world, the innovation, is really only as good as knowing how to use it. So a very big portion of the investments and commitments that we make are related to training, educating, and skilling individuals to be part of the digital and AI world that we live in. Not so much because we want more and more people to adopt and use. Yes, that's true. But also because we believe in the economic opportunity that's offered by training and skilling and getting people a lot more integrated into a world that is enhanced by technology and enhanced by AI. So I have the great privilege of sitting on that team, on the Microsoft Philanthropies team, corely centered in our AI skills program area. And what I get to do there is build the engagement and experiences around that. And that could be everything from events to, creating eyeballs and visibility for the work that we do around skilling, really making sure that the community has places to go to and understands what we do and how to interact with us across different platforms. So I'm just really, really excited to be here to do this work. It's humbling, deeply humbling. And every day I learn something new about AI. And that's my favorite thing about being here, is really the ability to learn.
I love that. Thank you for sharing that. And your authenticity around your commitment to the nonprofit sector just comes through in everything that you do. We'll talk a little bit more about how you got there in that journey. Erin, you allowed me to read your short title because I was fumbling over my words. So as Microsoft Tech for Social Impact Chief Product Officer, I know that's a shorter title. What do you do and how does it intersect with what Devi's world is?
Amazing. A great question. So I also have the amazing privilege of working across our industry to really help bring our whole platform to life for nonprofit organizations worldwide. And so every day I'm thinking about, with our teams, how to connect the vast array of technology we have on our platform to the specific needs and problems that our industry is facing. And that's a constantly evolving and really hard to get your arms around problem. And so our express responsibility is to try to make that easier and easier for organizations to consume and to lean into and to take advantage of if it's a fit for them. And so I really every day work with our teams to lead industry technology and the strategy around that. What should we be investing in? What doesn't serve us as a sector to invest in as much as we continue to evolve? And Devi said something really important, and that is affordability. The reason I came to Microsoft was because I'd spent a number of decades building product in this sector and felt there was a real imbalance in the cost of ownership of this amazing technology and the organizations who need it most. And I think that's a journey we're going to continue to chip away at, hopefully for as quickly as possible. But it's one where I also feel we have, as vendors and software vendors in the space, a deep responsibility to keep making progress on.
Especially in the nonprofit sector, resource-constrained organizations. We're not talking about U.S. only, right? Microsoft touches pretty much every corner of the planet. Seeing nonprofits transform and amplify their mission, transform their ability to serve their constituencies affordably is huge. That accessibility and affordability. So that's a great segue into what drew you into the nonprofit sector in general. I find that I call myself an accidental fundraiser. I was in the tech industry and kind of just fell into it, and the career found me. I didn't find it. What was your path? Because you could do a lot of things, especially at Microsoft, a lot of things that would have nothing to do with humanitarian issues. Like for both of you, how did you end up in this space really serving nonprofit orgs?
Well, I can start, Erin, if you'd like. I did start in the nonprofit sector. I consider myself someone who worked in the nonprofit sector, who's worked in now the for-profit sector, and in what I would probably call the semi-profit sector, somewhere in between those two. But probably what's most exciting to me is that as I was making the transition to corporate social responsibility, corporate philanthropy type roles in the tech sector, I didn't find that there was a lot of people from the nonprofit sector with me at the table. So the biggest lesson for me in my career has been around the incredible amount of skills, training, and strength I gained from being a nonprofit employee, predominantly a fundraiser, during my time in nonprofit, and how transferable those skills are, how you can be agile, you can be so scrappy with very limited resources, and you're able to really take a lot of that learning. You know how to ask for things when you need them. You know how to deliver on time to communities. You know how to meet deadlines. You know how to collaborate when you need to, sometimes with competitors. I think all of those skills serve nonprofit professionals very, very well in the for-profit sector. Yet when I was looking for jobs in the for-profit sector, sometimes I would hear, oh, you're not going to be able to keep up with the pace. Oh, all of your experience is in this sector, almost like there's an imbalance and one sector is better than the other. And I'm here to tell you that's just not true. If there's one thing I can say about nonprofit professionals is they are often the ones that could teach for-profit professionals something or the other about how to really gravitate towards agility, pivot quickly, learn how to make decisions very quickly, and sort of move in an environment that requires trying, failing, and then trying again. So that is really my journey.
That's awesome. I mean, there's so many ways to scale impact in having worked in the nonprofit sector and the tech sector. Being ambitious around wanting to reduce inequities and inequality in the world today has never been easier in some ways because it doesn't have to be constrained by a tax status. You can do this in either on both sides of the house, and both have advantages and disadvantages in some regard, but the end outcome is that there's just so many more options than there were in the past, where it's just like really more bioptic. So Erin, what about you? Did the nonprofit sector find you, or did you find it and it just never let you go, or what?
That's right. It found me. It was very accidental. I tried to escape, and it drew me right back, I think, which is often the experience for many, but a very different origin story than Devi, though I appreciate her grounding and foundation in the sector from the get-go. I was more accidental. I moved out of college. I got the tech bug in college during the first tech boom. I was right at the end of it, just to date myself a little bit. And I got that bug working for a startup, and it never left me. And I loved the power of technology to help mainly humans to transform and tackle problems. And then I moved. I graduated from college. I was meant to work at a management consulting firm because I had no idea what I wanted to do with my life. And I moved to Chicago on September 12th, 2001. And the whole world changed and the economy changed overnight, and that company pulled back all their offers, and I found myself with a different path. So I took the first reasonable thing that I found, and that was a job at a small nonprofit fundraising consultancy in Chicago, and I earned my stripes and learned the ropes running development program reviews and helping organizations to prepare for their capital and comprehensive campaigns. And so learned the fundraising side of the business that way, and then parlayed that into more of a direct marketing analytics nonprofit firm back in the Boston area. And I was hooked. So I've spent about 16 of my 23 years in tech building products for nonprofits. And then I had to take a little break and make sure I really knew what I was doing in the product building space. And so I went and worked on the commercial side, following a passion that has been a through line for me the whole time, which is around analytics and data and visualizations. And even AI, although in the old days we just used humans for all of that. And I think what remains so amazing, and despite all the challenges that organizations face every single day with over 10 million organizations worldwide, the technology is an imperative, but it is truly the humans who tackle the change management. It is truly the humans that will help an organization and the missions that they serve to evolve. And I love nothing more than I think the sector deserves good, well-designed, hardworking software that can operate on its behalf. And I think there's still a ways to go to achieve that goal for the sector, but it's one that's been just ever captivating. And to Devi's point, this is an enormous industry with the scrappiest, hardest working individuals I've had the privilege of working with. And so it stands in comparison. I think it can challenge the corporate world any day in terms of what it can drive.
And that's awesome. And I love that you both started at different ends, but then have kind of met here in the middle at the intersection of AI and nonprofits, and done so in a company that's really been at the heart of it since the generative AI explosion 2 years ago, right? Like you're right up there in early investment in OpenAI. you're one of the big companies that's really seeing such significant changes in how you're developing your products and so on. So in this area that you're in, especially with how fast it changes, what are the most interesting conversations you're having on that AI and nonprofit joining together?
Yeah, I'm happy to say a word and jump in. I think on the sort of micro level, it's those kind of watching the light bulb pop for people, maybe the first time they experience AI and experience kind of solving a problem in a different way. For me, I remember that first big press conference in February 2023. Now, I had never really carved out time to watch a big Microsoft press conference. Don't tell anybody. I had not done that as a typical practice. And I watched that press release. And for me, the whole way of searching for information changed. I realized that, the way I'd been searching for information hadn't really served how my brain works very well. And it was just this enormous light bulb opportunity. But to see a nonprofit worker or leader who writes their first prompt and gets something useful back in return, or experiments with a tool, that's truly amazing. I think at the macro level, and it's a little bit provocative to say because I've spent so many of those years in tech working on CRM and SaaS, we're starting to imagine that next generation of tech worker in least developed countries especially, who will never interact with a CRM, who will use natural language, generative AI to ask their questions to get the data back that they need. And the machine will do the work to fill in the fields that need to be filled in the data table behind. And what gets me really excited about that is it's always going to be about the data. And it's always going to be about us helping the sector continue to invest in having good data hygiene and having clean information to be able to build from. And I think the transformation between these large language models to small language models has huge potential for the sector. So it's going to be a fascinating few years.
Yeah, and I think from my lens, very similar to how Erin described the light bulb moment, it's people sort of take on this learning culture. All of a sudden, you have from CEOs, executive directors, all the way to the staff, really try this first prompt out and think to themselves, I think I can use this. This is interesting. And then to start to have really important conversations that they probably should have had around data and privacy for years before, around transparency, accountability, bias. Really, really important conversations that the internet really was a part of, right? I mean, those are all conversations we've had with our children or had with the teachers at our children's school. And here we are having these conversations at work for the first time because executive director and fundraising associate are learning this at exactly the same time. It's new to everyone at exactly the same time. And that has been really powerful to see because it democratizes everything, because not only does it level the playing field for people who are non-techies, as Erin described, to now literally enter into, create workflows that previously belonged to technologists, right? And it allows them to do that, but then it also levels the playing field because you can have access to this regardless of what stage in your career that you are. And you can use it equally in the same way. But that learning mindset is such a critical piece of the shift we need to see in the sector. And we're already seeing in the sector, I would say.
Yeah, that's such a great segue because having been in the predictive AI space, Scott and I met each other in 2017. We're doing machine learning and essentially measuring connection. And when I used to talk about, in fact, my TEDx was in 2018 on the AI and the future of generosity. And people honestly looked at me like I had three heads. They're like, why these two things don't go together? Like, why would you do this? This is a fad, whatever it might be. Fast forward to today, it's amazing to see how, to your point, even the smallest resource-constrained organizations are leveling up in ways that were just never before possible. I know that you've done studies and have some stats in terms of adoption, and this is probably like this insanely moving target because we're talking in the last 2 years, just massive change in how societies operate, how businesses operate, how people operate. Where do you think the nonprofit sector is in AI adoption? And I ask you this as a Microsoft person, you get to see the other side too, like the for-profit world moving forward, nonprofit sector, like just whatever you might share about, like where are we at, how are we doing, and any light that you can shed on that.
Yeah, let me share a little bit. So we recently did field a study, 1,100 respondents, that's 13 countries. And I think this was probably the most global study that's been done, solely focused on the nonprofit sector. We did a very stratified approach. So we have an incredible amount of data across different cause types, across these countries that we looked at. We looked at countries from Kenya to South Africa, France, UK, Germany, Canada, US. So really, really across the board, Australia. And what we found are just some basic stats that we're still looking at about 10% of nonprofits, which I think is a pretty low number. And I'm happy that it's low. I was surprised, but I'm happy. 10% of nonprofits who just don't use it at all. They have not tried it and they do not use it. But then you start getting into some of these other statistics and you see about 42% of nonprofits actually consider themselves beginners. And what does beginner mean? It means that they've tried it at least once, or that they're actively trying it for various use cases every day. Maybe it hasn't stuck. It's not a habit yet, but they very much are in that beginner stage. They're exploring. And I think that has been really interesting to look at, is to see this 42%. And that number was lower even 6 months ago. We also saw in an earlier study that was done across Microsoft, across industries, not just nonprofit, we saw that a lot of nonprofits in that particular study talked about the fact that they were identified as power users within their nonprofit. And yet they were one of the few power users within their nonprofit. And now what we're seeing is not just increase in frequency of use by an individual, but more of the organization is using it. And those are two really important statistics, because we're trying to understand leadership use and staff use at the same time, because often we're seeing that it happens both ways, right? The last thing I'd say is, when you ask about the benefits of adoption, the nonprofit sector says it's for 64% of nonprofits, it's about operational efficiencies. It is really the way that they're looking at cutting down some of the everyday mundane tasks that could be easily automated, that saves time, so that they can really focus on what matters. They do not want to replace the human touch, right? And a lot of nonprofits, I have a stat in here that I'll share a little bit later, don't believe in replacing the donor relationship with AI. They really want that to be the human touch. And I think that's very important for us as we continue to think about fundraising and the applications around AI. But those are some early looks at our data. Primarily, what I think has been intriguing for me, and Erin, I think, sees this the most in her role, is the variety of use cases, just this incredible amount of innovation that's come from the space. And I think often use cases that you're not seeing yet in the for-profit world that could potentially serve as best practices and an opportunity to learn and grow together.
100%. And we'll talk about that in a little bit, but some of the most common uses that we're seeing today probably aren't that surprising, although the first one that bubbled to the top in a similar survey out to 950 different worldwide organizations, which really corroborate the statistics that Devi just shared, data management rises to the top. Online search in a different way. Of course, that's not as big of a surprise. Idea generation, content generation, all of these starting points are becoming much more of the de facto starting point. How do I get my job? How do I get a job done? Well, let's start that job in a new and different way. The other thing we're really leaning into and working hard to continue learning, though, are places where there are differences and disparity. And we do see differences in use and approach and differences in resistance depending on where you live across the world, depending on what generation of worker you are.
Yeah.
And some of the things here that I think are going to be really important guiding principles in the coming 2 years are especially around where the resistance currently lies. And what we learned from some of these studies is that the resistance is typically due to first disinterest and then a perceived lack of need for the technology, a lack of understanding of what are the potential benefits to me, how could this help me in my role, and a little bit of distrust, which can differ depending on where you live around the world. We see that Gen Z is most likely to use AI both at work and outside of work, while Gen X is least likely to use AI from a generational perspective. But as users of all generations are exposed to more training, their experience and their perception and their trust changes. And we'll have to keep watching this, but these are kind of fascinating. And then the geographic differences are really interesting as well. A little bit more skepticism in the U.S. than you might expect,
and sometimes Western Europe too. We're seeing that across the data on the skepticism there. I think what's interesting to me about the space we're in right now is that we always knew there was BYOAI happening, right? Bring your own AI to work. When we look at the numbers across all sectors, not just nonprofit, that number is something like 75% of knowledge workers are bringing their own AI to work, right? When you look at the nonprofit sector, the number is 35% of nonprofit workers. We aren't that far behind. I think that nonprofits think that there's this massive gap, right? And that we're always the stragglers, we're the ones that are delayed in adoption. And yes, some of that is true, but we're not that far behind. Nonprofit workers are bringing their own AI to work. And so now it's really about how do we create the structures to apply it?
I would say, as someone in the nonprofit sector for so long, that the barriers of entry are gone, right? So accessibility and affordability is the game changer. So where in predictive AI, predictive AI is very expensive. Compute power is very expensive. Big data, it only worked well with big data. So there was this digital divide that was just massive and getting worse, but all bets are off. Gen AI comes on the scene, accessibility and affordability, you can't afford not to at this point. And to your point, it's a level playing field. I mean, you can extract just as much value, a nonprofit, from any for-profit that is using the tool. We're all on the same plateau. There's not really anything technologically that's not within the realm of a nonprofit right now, which is so exciting.
So exciting. Yeah,
it is. And as innovation continues, the economics will become better and better around this as well.
Yeah. I know we had a lot of questions that we want to cover, but I know that we're running out of time. Erin, you mentioned the skepticism in the US more than we would expect to see. What advice do you have for nonprofit leaders who are skeptical about how to use it or how to get started or why they should use it?
Great question. And there is a quote from a LinkedIn Work Index study from earlier this year that really sticks in my mind. So Ryan Roslansky, who's the CEO of LinkedIn, shared through this data and this work, they're predicting that in 7 years, about 70% of us will experience transformational changes in our jobs and our roles due to AI. And I thought at that moment, wow, that kind of lit a fire under me. And I think we all want to be on the cutting edge of that and not laggards in that arrangement, if that's to be true. And so that could sound pretty scary. And I think that's exactly not the point. The point is to start small and experiment and to try to do so for yourself individually, but also to create a team culture where that act of starting small and experimentation is really welcome, fostered, and supported. So something as basic as setting up a lunch and learn and having people talk about we do this a little bit in our environment as well. Hey, what's something you use AI for that has nothing to do with your day job? And you just get ideas and you think, oh, I could use it for this or I could use it for that. And that's sort of step one. And then try to extend that into building a culture around prompt engineering and trying and failing and trying again. This gets better and better with time. And it can be hard to navigate. There's so many resources out there available now that are free, but taking advantage of some of that well-curated but affordable or free training, we're happy to help point folks in that direction, is really critical. And then we have some additional resources we would love to leave behind for all of your listeners around working with your board, in particular, around creating a governance framework around ethical and responsible AI use. I think we have to really approach this from each level of the stakeholder pyramid, including the board, and help bring them along with the journey.
Yeah. I think that's brilliant. And I completely agree with so much of that advice. I think the other thing we hear from leaders is how they're hiring today. And 66% of leaders wouldn't hire someone without AI skills today. That is a very high number.
Very high.
It really does change the way we look at gaining these skills in the future or thinking about moving through careers with AI. I love what Erin said about policy and governance. I think it's an area that we as a sector do need to improve upon. Are we creating the right AI manifesto within our organization? It's not about when we use it, it's about when we don't use it. That's actually what matters more. Define those guardrails really early and make it about your cause, your structure, your culture. And then the last point on culture, if I could just say, we talked about a learning mindset earlier on. Let's talk about the editor mindset, right? I think we as writers, and I did a little cringe thing when Erin mentioned Gen X, because I very much relate to that generation and I love using AI, but I am using an editor mindset. Like I am acknowledging that I will not be writing the first draft. The AI is creating the first draft of that thank you letter for me, and I am an editor, right? So to write is human, to edit is divine. Let's be divine. That's what I keep telling people. Stop worrying about going from 0 to 80, but go 8, that last 20% is yours. And the more and more we can be comfortable with our work product being the editor and being the piece that's edited, I think the better off we all can be within our day-to-day jobs. And that starts with the leaders.
I love that. And as leaders, I think it's really important to normalize when we are using AI and to make it A-okay to leverage. So just like we would when we source a paper or white paper, just how we would source some data or statistics, I think it's a great idea to source when you leverage these tools, and that helps all team members understand, oh, this is okay. I should do that too, or I could consider doing that too.
Yeah, this conversation reminds me so much of LinkedIn post I read last week. Liz Grennan, who is a consultant at McKinsey at Quantum Black, she's married to Connor Grennan, who does a lot of AI training for all different corporations. One of the things that she was saying in this is scaling AI isn't just a tech problem; it's a transformational challenge. And so leaders, and I'm so glad you mentioned boards, have an outsized role in helping build a culture of innovation, a culture of curiosity, a culture where experimentation is rewarded, not penalized. That's a big shift from how not just nonprofits, but most organizations have been built for years, right? And so I think leaders really listening in and really examining within themselves, like what are the biases that they have against innovation or for innovation? How can they help advance their organizations? Because what worked in the past will not work in the future. I mean, we know all bets are off. The game has changed. Dive in. So we could talk for hours. There's two more questions. I just think that they're actually our last two questions. I knew this was going to happen. We had just so much to cover, but let's at least cover two more. And because I just think there's so much experience and wisdom from both of you. And again, I'm intimately interested because you work at Microsoft, which is like the corporation of all corporations. Like it's massive. It's transformed the world in so many meaningful ways. And so I think there's a lot of value in learning from corporations. So the question is really around like what lessons, I'll reframe this, I guess. When I was in the nonprofit, I was constantly drawing upon lessons from for-profit to be like, okay, like where could we improve or how should we look at these things? And I used to talk about things like ROI in a nonprofit at a conference, and then I was afraid my car was going to be keyed after. Our sector has changed a lot over the last 20 years, but what are the lessons from the corporate world that you think nonprofits can benefit from? in terms of adopting this technology, is there any hidden secrets, or we're just all in, it's a level playing field and we're all in it together?
It's a really great question. And I would actually tie it back to what you just described, Nathan, and ROI. I understand the ROI in the car keying scenario. I would change the ROI label to impact. I think where we can actually meet, and where when the corporate world we're held to account is what does success look like? What success are we trying to drive? And what impact have we delivered? And that can be a pretty ruthless game in a corporation like ours. There are only so many initiatives that we can materially impact and invest in, but we try to take a very impact-driven view and learn. I think that's the key. To tie back to the prior comments, is there a learning from what works and what doesn't work, even more importantly, culture and mindset. And I think that ties so nicely to the nonprofit world of program evaluation and theories of change and monitoring and evaluation. It's all the same. It's all about impact at the end of the day.
Devi, any secret sauce?
Yeah, I think my biggest lesson from being in both of these sectors, and I feel like straddling both of them still today, is really around the ability to say no and then to stop doing what we're doing. I think the nonprofit sector has a hard time with no. I just think that's true. I've seen mission creep. I've seen all sorts of different ways that has manifested itself, particularly in the COVID years. And then even after. And then when a program starts and it has gone to a certain place and it needs to be over, right? Or needs to shift or evolve or to stop, I think the nonprofit sector needs to learn how to stop doing that thing in order to move on to do other things. And that can take time and is not a natural muscle.
Yeah.
At the same time, the sector is full of natural curiosity, which is what allows us to be yes people all the time, because we understand that trying different things and being naturally curious about humanity and the things that humans need is important. So lean into the natural curiosity, but also lean into natural boundaries that you have to create.
That's brilliant. Knowing when and how to say no, I think, is something I struggle with personally, and in harnessing my curiosity, but especially in the nonprofit sector, because the work never sleeps, right?
Yes.
I mean, there was a thing when I worked at a cancer hospital, CEO would be like, well, cancer never sleeps, why should we? And so we kind of live in this own hamster wheel of like, it's just never enough. But we know that's not good for us long term. So I think that's really great advice.
Yeah. And so, I mean, we're doing good in the work that we're doing. So who wants to do less good, right? But you do need to set those boundaries. So I think that is important to figure out where to say no. But I think probably all have a little bit of a people pleaser in us, which is why we're in this space.
Yeah.
So the last question, Nathan kind of mentioned this earlier, that Microsoft is just so large. Like you are not bound by any geographical boundaries or anything like that. So how is Microsoft Philanthropies supporting nonprofits in some of these developing countries with, different technical challenges than what we see here in the US?
Yeah, one of the things I want to share with you all is something I'm really proud of, which is we have partnerships all over the world, specifically in 21 or so markets, with various community partners, workforce development organizations that help people who are furthest from opportunity upskill on AI. And one of the stories I want to tell you about is an Indigenous woman in Brazil who came from a very specific province there, and was able to upskill and join and start a very impressive career in technology because of some of these skilling programs. And I think that the more and more we can stop looking at, again, unnatural barriers and really start looking at ways that AI can transform. Remember, it is natural language in any language. Let's remember that, right? That's what allows us to be global. We are launching, and I'm really, really excited that this is happening on the same day as our fundraising.ai summit happened, the AI Skills Navigator, which is an amazing tool that leverages AI in order to help learners, users, developers, organizational leaders to go in there and find some great learning pathways to skill up on generative AI. And some of that's localized for different geographies around the world. But I think this is the type of tool that platform like Microsoft with its many geographical locations can offer. So really, really proud to be able to offer that.
It's fantastic.
And yes, and just to underscore, the Skills for Social Impact work is just a wonderful example of a purposeful, purpose-built program that was created with and for the sector. And we have, it can be a challenge to get your arms around all of the ways that Microsoft Philanthropies is delivering programs to the sector. But it continues to grow. The investments continue to grow year over year. The current investments per year are pretty astounding, north of $4.5 billion US dollars each year. And that comes in many different forms. The Skills for Social Impact program and the Skills Navigator Debbie just mentioned, our AI for Good program. We have deep security and cybersecurity threat detection programs to keep organizations safe. We're working with U.S. rural hospitals and to protect elections across the world. And these are all driven out of the philanthropies area. So we promise to help you navigate all of that. And there's a lot that you can discover through all of our web assets, but it's worth spending some time looking at what is available. Chances are there's a great program that's a fit for any one particular mission across the globe. And that's really the commitment of the company, to keep deepening those investments.
Yeah, and that really comes through loud and clear, even with your global summit and bringing people like even Trevor Noah, who's talking about his experiences of innovation in rural and actually quite a bit of work in the global south and in India. So I love all of that. We unfortunately are out of time. We could go on forever, truly. And this now wins the award for our longest podcast, but I know our listeners are going to like soak it in. There's so much wisdom here, and I know we'll be sharing some links to some of the resources that you've shared in the show notes so that people can learn more. You're not far away, so if people want to get in touch with you, obviously LinkedIn and through Fundraising AI. So we're not letting you go anytime soon. Just we'll say it there on record. Both of you have been instrumental in getting us to where we're at. So, and Erin, not knowing that you were the reason why Debbie's at Microsoft. So, I mean, truly thank you both for all of that you do for not just Fundraising AI, but for our sector overall. I love the big picture thinking about how AI and data can truly be a game changer for humanitarian efforts all over the world. So thank you both. And thank you everyone for listening into the Fundraising AI podcast. We will see you again next week. I actually have the pleasure of interviewing Chinesa Okolo, who is a Brookings Fellow and Time 100 AI. So it's going to tie in so nicely with this conversation and really helping amplify this. So
thank you, Nathan and Scott, for everything you're doing for the sector. I think fundraising.ai changed the way every single fundraiser looks at AI today, and you are leading this movement. So thank you for everything.
It's amazing. Thank you. Thanks everyone for listening, and we'll catch you on the next episode. Take care.